Good morning, everybody. Hello, welcome to FinTech North's latest webinar, Operational Resilience Countdown to DORA, hosted in partnership with Escode, who are part of NCC Group. NCC Group, for those who don't know, are one of our strategic partners at FinTech North this year. A huge thank you to Wayne, to Sam, to Joe and the team for their fantastic support of our community over the last year. In fact, it goes back many years before that, but it's been a pleasure working with the team this year in partnership. So I just wanted to say a big thank you straight up on the back of some of the work that we've done this year, which has included, a few successful operational resilience themed events, including this one. So welcome to everybody who's joining us today. We'll be recording this webinar. We'll be sharing that with our community as well, of over 8,000 people across the North. So for those of you who weren't able to join this live, you'll be able to watch it back and read all about it afterwards as well. So yeah, really looking forward to getting into some of the content today. My name's Joe. For those who don't know me, I'm the General Manager at FinTech North. I just wanted to introduce our organisation. There's always people joining our events who've never been to a FinTech North event before. Apologies to those of you who are returning for the 10th or 20th time. You'll have heard me go through these slides many times, but it's always useful for those people who aren't aware of FinTech North and what's going on in the North as a whole. So just want to give you a bit of an overview about the work that we do, and we'll get started after that. So really quickly on FinTech North, as an organisation, we exist to bring together the Northern FinTech community in places like Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Durham, Hull, you name it, Cheshire as well. We try and get out to the entire North and host events that promote the North as a centre of excellence in FinTech. We try to make sure that all of the amazing innovation happening in the North doesn't take place in silos and is actually part of a wider UK landscape. And we also go out of our way to support startups and scale-ups, with their business development. We try and provide connections to them. We try and provide profile opportunities at our events. And if we become aware of any, business opportunities within our ecosystem, or indeed in other overseas markets, we'll do our best to kind of plug them into those opportunities there, basically. So that's the kind of big picture overview of FinTech North. I much prefer this slide because I think this slide really gives you the core essence of everything that we're about. Fundamentally, FinTech North is a face-to-face community of people who are interested in FinTech, who work in FinTech. And myself, Ryan and Rachel and Silas, the FinTech North team, we work tirelessly to bring you all together, mainly for networking, but also to share ideas, shine a light on innovation, share best practice, all of these great things. I think the thing I like to highlight most on this slide, as any good commercial manager would, is that we're entirely self-funded, and we rely on the support of like-minded organisations within our ecosystem, much like Escode and NCC Group, to come on board, to take a partnership, to sponsor an event so that we can continue doing the work that we do to sort of develop FinTech in the North of England. On that note, just want to give a big shout out to all of our partners this year, all of whom you can see on screen now. Again, too many to run through individually, but a huge thank you to all of these organisations. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do the job that we do, and we believe it's a really important one, and we play an important role in the ecosystem. So just quickly on FinTech in the North, for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the ecosystems that we work in and that we support, there's probably about 400 FinTech firms, give or take, right across the North, which is the patch that you can see on screen here, everything sort of south of Scotland and north of Sheffield. That's out of about 2,500 FinTech firms nationally. The sector in the UK nationally generates about 11 billion GVA every year for the UK economy, and everything that's happening in the North generates about 2 billion out of that. So it's a really sizable ecosystem in and of itself. And interestingly, we see different specialisms in these cities as well. So if I sort of talk through this graphic from west to east, in Liverpool, we see a real strength there in insurtech and wealth tech. In Greater Manchester, we see real strengths in payments, e-commerce. There's a lot of great accountancy software as well in Greater Manchester. In the Leeds City region, there's a real strength there in banking, lending, and regtech. And up in the northeast, there's a real innovation corridor between Durham and Newcastle, an emerging specialism in payments there as well. And a lot of these specialisms do relate back to that city's sort of past prosperity and industrial heritage. So just for an example, Greater Manchester, long a centre of retail and textiles trade, and we see that reflected in some of the FinTech propositions that we see there today. some awesome things happening right across the north. As you can tell from these graphics, there's a lot of awesome companies based up here. These graphics can be found on Whitecap Consulting's website. They're publicly available to download. They're part of Whitecap Consulting's ecosystem analysis of the northern fintech sector. So if you want a deep dive on everything that's going on in all of these great cities, please check out their website. That's where these ecosystem graphics come from. And you'll be able to do a bit of a deeper dive than I've just done there. But hopefully that gives you an idea of what a vibrant place the North is when it comes to fintech. And yeah, we'll be digging into that with the event today, I'm sure. So just a few more words on FinTech North and some of our sort of strategy and activity for this year, and indeed looking ahead at next year now as well. We are starting to plan for that. This slide kind of mirrors what I put up right at the start, but what I'd like to draw attention to here is that across this year, we've worked not only to bring together the community through a program of awesome events, but we've also started working in two new areas for FinTech North: international trade, and we've also set out on a bit of a crusade around fintech skills as well. So I'll touch upon some of those now. Just on the event side of things, we're getting to the end of this year's program now, but we've still got some awesome events lined up in the calendar. We're in Leeds on the 5th of November. We're in Manchester with our next conference on the 21st of November, and we'll be getting out to Liverpool on the 3rd of December as well. So please check out our website for a bit more information on some of those events, and we'd hope that you sign up. And I'll ask the team now to put some links in the chat to some of our events as well, so that you've all got a nice, easy registration link to sign up to these things. We are now actually planning for next year as well. So Liverpool in Q1 will be our first conference, followed by Leeds in Q2. So if any of the people on this webinar would be interested in working with us or getting involved in some of our events, please reach out to us. Our email address is at the bottom there, info@fintechnorth.uk, and we'd love to get you involved. I think it's been a stellar year for us as an organisation. I think by the time the year's out, we'll have hosted, I think, about 30 events right across the north. And these graphics just give you an idea of some of the brands that we've been engaged with this year. Some awesome brands, some fantastic fintech organisations and financial services organisations. So yeah, huge thanks to everybody who's been involved and supported our events. On the international trade front, we've always worked quite extensively with organisations like the Department for Business and Trade on fintech trade missions, both inbound and outbound. And this year, we've had a real concerted effort to do more international activity. Earlier on in the year, we took a trade mission out to Money 2020. There's about 10 organisations on our trade delegation, about 18 to 19 individuals, and we attended Europe's biggest fintech trade show. And we'll be looking to make more of that type of activity happen next year, both inbound, showcasing the North as a destination for fintechs to establish in the UK, and indeed bringing northern fintechs into the markets where we think there's a real synergy for their products and services. So again, if you're interested in this type of activity, please reach out to us. The final thing I wanted to mention before I hand over to our first speaker, Adrian, is our skills initiative that we've been working on this year. We're always hearing from employers, fintech and financial services organizations, that they're struggling to recruit the right people with the right skills to fuel the growth of their business. We know that this is an endemic sector issue. It's not even limited to fintech. It's a broader thing than that. And we were always hearing from people in the early stages of fintech career, how do I get into the sector? What skills do I need to stand out? Where are the jobs? Where are the internships? And we felt that there was a bit of a dissonance going on here, that those two parties weren't connected as well as they should be. So we've looked around ourselves in the ecosystem and we thought, we're in the middle of this. We know the right people, the right stakeholders to impact this agenda positively. We know the universities, the education providers, we know the employers, we know the training providers and the skills accreditors. Why not try and do something to impact this agenda? So at the start of the year, we set up a skills steering committee with some of those stakeholders together to kind of come up with an initiative that would be additive to the ecosystem. On the back of some of that work, we've done a bit of work to our website to make it clear that this is a priority area for us this year. And we've also hired Silas, who you can see on screen now on the left-hand side, who's hopefully in the chat as well. And Silas has been working to develop a fintech upskilling course for students, for people at the early stages of a career to upskill themselves in several different areas of fintech, payments, lending, banking, regtech, all the kind of strong subsectors that we have up here in the north, with the idea of making, that kind of fresh, younger generation of talent, more career ready for fintech. So yeah, if Silas could put some links in the chat, that'd be awesome to kind of yeah, draw your attention to some of the work that we're doing in skills there. That'd be great. So that kind of brings me to the end of my slides. And yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to the team Escode, part of NCC Group, a global leader in software escrow, for all of their support this year. Really looking forward to hearing from our next speaker, Adrian House. So, Adrian, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, really look forward to this regulatory scene set that you're going to do for us.
Oh, many thanks, Joe,
Thank you,
and
sir.
thanks very much to FinTech Northwest for arranging this. Let me just switch to my screen now then. Okay, thanks everybody. And again, thank you, Joe, and thank you for FinTech North. As you can see, my name's Adrian Archincar. I'm the Global Commercial Director for Escode, which is part of the NCC Group. So I'm going to give an overview of our business and the services that we provide. But of course, this is really about DORA. So after that, I'm going to be introducing one of my colleagues, Wayne, who I think many of you know anyway, Wayne Scott, and then we can get into the more the detail around DORA. But yeah, let's just jump in, if you don't mind, initially, and I can talk a little bit about what we do. When I was looking at the attendees to the webinar, so many thanks everybody that has joined, and if you're listening via recording, I'm hoping you take value from it as well. But when we were looking at the attendees, we see a good range of both fintechs that we deal with already and financial institutions. So I expect that many of you are familiar with what we do, but it's probably worth me just giving a quick overview. So we're best known for software escrow, although we have lots of adjacent services to that. And software escrow is essentially a legal agreement between the software licensee and the software developer, with ourselves as the third party. And essentially, we take source code and other related materials into escrow, and then we retain those in safe and secure storage and only release them to the software licensee in the event that certain commercially adverse events occur, which we would call release events. So really our model is to protect all parties, because whilst the beneficiary to any ultimate release to an escrow agreement is the software licensee, we also find that by working with fintechs, it gives them the level of assurance that they often need in order to do business with the financial institutions. So that's a quick overview of what we do. I'm going to jump into a little bit more detail shortly. I've got to give you the obligatory facts and figures sheet that you expect at times like this, I guess. We are the world market leader in our field. We've been doing this for 40 years. We contract with more than 50,000 individual contract parties, and we've done business in 135 countries and 16 legal jurisdictions. So there's almost no scenario where we can't support a software vendor or a software user if they have a requirement for escrow. So as you can see from these statistics, we're supporting a vast array of software publishers and a vast array of licensees on a worldwide basis. I think really what's most useful, if I talk about why we do this and some of the risks that we look to mitigate. So as I said before, we talk about commercially adverse events. So clearly, commercially adverse events result in risk. So I thought it'd be useful to just categorize how we look at things. But I think it's then important to realize that we're going to go into more detail when we talk about DORA, with Wayne leading from that perspective. But when we talk about commercially adverse events, often what we are talking about is businesses in acute financial difficulty, being software publishers that may enter into difficulty. So that's administration, bankruptcy, and any other form of those things that tends to involve a business entering into insolvency or prior to insolvency, any of the precursors to it. But it can also be where businesses are having difficulty with the service levels that are being given. So there's a failure to maintain a service level against an agreement. Or it can often be situations whereby there's a transfer of ownership of the IP from the original software publishers to another, which may be as a result of an individual application being transferred, or indeed the business being sold. So those events can obviously result in risks in the minds of the licensee. So in those situations, we would categorize this as falling into three typical events that scenarios that we provide risk mitigation against. So a supplier failure would obviously be as the result of a business entering into insolvency. But any failure to maintain or deliver against a contractual obligations can be seen as service deterioration. And of course, concentration risk can happen if a business is sold into another organization, resulting in a software licensee becoming increasingly dependent upon a narrower and narrower risk range of third-party critical suppliers. So that's essentially our view of how we see commercially adverse events resulting in risks. And then essentially what we do, just kind of going back to our solutions model, is what we say is we work with both parties to establish the legal right for the software licensee to, if necessary, take control of the IP. But of course, then what we talk about, once we've helped people establish the legal rights, then of course, in a situation where we release source code and other IP to the software licensee, then we also need to talk to them about having done a knowledge transfer piece. So knowledge transfer for ourselves is making sure that we've done the necessary work in conjunction with the software publisher to ensure that we've documented how upon the release of code and other materials, that software application can be correctly compiled, deployed, and maintained. And then the final part in our portfolio in support of that, and I think Wayne will go on to talk more about the concept of scenario testing. But of course, it's all well and good for us to be able to have been able to do the knowledge transfer piece, but actually what we then need to be able to do is replicate what may happen in the event of a release to prove that the knowledge transfer will work. And then we have a range of scenario tests that involve us, again, working very closely with software vendors to set up and build an environment where we can actually demonstrate ourselves that under certain stressed exit scenarios, we can work with the licensee to get the software application up and running. So that was, I guess, something of a whistle-stop tour of what we do. But as I say, I'm sure many of you are very well aware of software escrow, and we're fortunate enough to be able to call many of you customers and partners of ours already. So let me bring in Wayne now. Wayne is our regulatory compliance solutions lead. Wayne spends his life working with regulators and, of course, software vendors and financial institutions. And he works not only in finance, but with regulators from all around the world in lots of other industries as well. So he routinely on our behalf responds to consultations, but also advises regulators on how our solutions can support them in achieving their desired regulatory outcomes. So I'm going to bring in Wayne now and begin to ask him some questions, so you don't have to listen to me too much anymore. So if I can bring you in now, Wayne, and start with that the broad question really, which is we all hear lots and lots and lots, and it's emerged in recent years more and more, the concept of operational resilience. So before we dive into DORA, the specifics, can you please give us a high level view of what is operational resilience and why it's becoming increasingly important?
Yeah, that's one of those very short questions that I could easily take an hour answering, isn't it? So yeah, as you said there, Adrian, I co-write our consultation paper responses, and I also spend a lot of time advising GSIBs and DSIBs and critical third parties on the risks that you've mentioned, and writing the policies and standards and procedures around successful stressed exit planning. But operational resilience as a really high level view is sort of the defined as the ability for an institution to continue to deliver critical operations through disruption. So, say within financial services, it builds on top of the prudential operational risk framework. It encompasses internal governance, outsourcing, business continuity, all the relevant sort of risk management related aspects. Operational resilience is essentially where all the risks are aggregated, and Escode and escrow sort of firmly fits into the sort of the third party risk management sections of operational resilience. In fact, where there's a potential for financial instability, as you said, within the supply chain.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more of it, aren't we, as well as ecosystems become more and more complex in business.
Yeah. It's happening more and more frequently. It's evolving. If we're sort of moving on a little bit here as things go on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you might be in danger of jumping to the next one, actually. So you're absolutely right. When we were talking about this, you were talking about how regulation has evolved, really. So it would be useful if you can perhaps just expand on that a little bit in terms of what you've seen in recent years. I know that you track statistics in terms of the amount of regulation that is emerging, and it's fair to say it's accelerated even
Ah,
in the last 3 or 4 years. Yeah.
definitely so. There was bits of regulation when we first started looking at this about 4 or 5 years ago. I think initially we counted about six or seven. No, sorry, it was about 12 elements of global regulation, specifically looking at operational resilience, not just within financial services. And you fast forward 4 or 5 years, there's definitely now, I think there's about 65 sets of operational resilience regulation. It is evolving. It's all been going on for some time. It isn't going away. I'd say it's maturing. It's not too much of a stretch to say there is an ongoing global regulatory alignment. Kind of starts simultaneously here in the UK and in Singapore, all tying back to some very well publicized financial IT failures that we had here in the UK. I won't name names on that because I've noticed that a couple of those financial entities are on the call today here. But what they did do is it left a measurable negative effects on the value of the UK market, the financial institutions themselves and customers. So you've got sort of like the UK, Canada, Switzerland, America, Australia, they all have their own iterations, if you like, of DORA. That are at different stages of full implementation. They're certainly very similar, but there's obviously, a difference in the prescriptive nature of the regulators from region to region. A broader look at it is, forgive me if it's a little controversial, but if the 2008 crash was primarily linked to high concentrations of risky debt within some financial institutions, then arguably what we've done over the last 15 or 16 years is introduce a new set of concentration risks in the form of technology and software, and potentially risks that are compounded even further with the use of the cloud. So technology has been identified, and software and cloud services have been identified of having the potential to present a set of sort of severe but plausible risks to the overall resilience of the market. So what you'll definitely see across all of these regulatory changes over the last 4 years or so is the set of risks outside of the cyber world that are being named by regulators. The risks that we mitigate, obviously, supply failure, service deterioration, and concentration risk are all being named as named risk. And I don't want to digress and go off piece too much, but I'd fully expect to see the work being done here within financial services regulations to spread out to the critical national infrastructure, and maybe even unregulated markets as well. Just because you don't have a regulator, or maybe a regulator doesn't name a set of risks, it doesn't mean that risk disappears. We certainly here within our organisation are already advising sections of the critical national infrastructure and progressive risk-averse retailers and logistic companies on their kind of DORA for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about it internally, don't we? That, as you say, and it doesn't even just apply to highly regulated markets, because the framework of these regulations is just good, sound commercial sense for a good way to govern and manage your business, whether or
Yeah.
not it's covered under specific regulation.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I know there's a lot of change in all of this, and obviously then there's resulting cost that comes from that. Yeah, but there's nothing really too outrageous about everything that's being suggested here.
Should we dive into DORA then? Because that's what
Go on
everybody's
then.
enrolled to this webinar for, I guess. I suppose I'll leave it to you about how you want to approach it, but I suppose it's really just talk us through it. How is it going to impact financial institutions, but also their critical third parties? So I suppose it's all about really defining what's DORA all about and what obligations does it place on all parties.
It's wide ranging. It really is. It covers, the three European supervisory authorities have all joined together, the EBA, ESMA, EOPA. So you've got, insurance, banking, securities and markets. They're all joining together to put out this sort of homogenized set of legislation. I mean, that's the first thing to sort of push through here. This is the law.
And it is
Obviously,
more far-reaching, is it not, DORA, than any other regulations we've seen as a precursor to them?
it certainly has a wider scope.
Yes.
Sorry, a wider reach, but a narrower scope. So our that sounds really contradictory, doesn't it? UK regulation looks at operational resilience across all the different types of risks. So environmental, political instability, those kind of things. Well, this DORA is aimed primarily as at ICT risks, and it builds on a set of sort of existing EU requirements that are in response to ongoing digital transformation, and with that transformation, there's sort of an evolution of new associated risks. So the idea is to have a uniform set of requirements across for operational resilience across nearly all the financial entities. And importantly, what we'll see here for the very first time within in Europe is that it will apply to the critical third parties, the information and communication technology services that provide services to the FS sector. So can we expect maybe the cloud platforms and professional services or data analytics to be in there? And DORA also mandates that all participants in the financial system have all necessary safeguards in place to mitigate attacks and other risks, such as supply failure, service deterioration, and concentration risk. So, we're talking, excuse me here, we're talking financial services, insurance, crypto will get covered and pulled in under MiCA, the supply chain, investment firms, trading venues, the infrastructure, crowdfunding, credit rating agencies, they're all involved in this. They're all captured by this. And now I'm massively simplifying this here, obviously, but there's 5 sections, key sections anyway. You've got the ICT risk management elements of it, laying out frameworks and guidelines for risk management. The idea is to sort of help organizations build more mature risk management programs. Then you've got incident reporting. It expands the scope of incidents that need to be reports, and in theory, streamlines the process, reporting process. I think the reporting guidelines were actually just released yesterday on how to report incidents, but it certainly requires faster reporting, encourages rapid incident investigation and responses to it, and should help to mitigate the impacts of a breach or failures. Pulling in next, the third section is sort of supply chain management. DORA imposes requirements on to have firm contractual relationships with the suppliers, and that they have to have strategies not just to manage the risk that the suppliers could potentially present, but you have to have strategies to exit those relationships, either in a planned exit or a stressed exit scenario, and a set of potential substitutes to replace those failed services. And then the big one is, the last two are very large requirements. There's the resilience testing elements. Really, the idea is to identify and correct any issues before they pose a threat to the operations. That's where we fit in, the stressed exit or separation plans. And then information sharing. It's kind of long overdue in a lot of ways, but the idea that many cyber threat actors active in the financial services industry will target multiple organizations simultaneously, but also a failure of a supplier can affect multiple financial services organizations simultaneously too. So by encouraging the sharing of threat intelligence data and supplier failure data, it should really get the industry to become more aware and more prepared for ongoing threats and risks. I went full rant there, didn't I?
Nicely covered. Nicely covered. Thank you. Okay, let's just maybe get to that next level of detail then. As I said at the top of the call, you spend so much of your time both with regulators and financial institutions and fintechs. How would you describe the state of readiness? I know that's a very general question, but how would you describe the general state of readiness? Might be useful for you to just remind everybody actually of what the deadline is, and then talk back from that in terms of where we're at from a readiness perspective. And then, of course, I'll be asking you for you to talk to the audience, to give advice in terms of how, if you're a little bit behind the curve, you can close that gap.
Yeah, and we've got a panel a little later on here with some
Yeah.
fantastic speakers on there as well. And I don't want to steal too much of their thunder, but they've got some great points to add in here as well. I would say when it comes to the risks that we mitigate, there's a confidence that the organizations are ready, and I've gone in and advised a number of GSIBs and DSIBs and the critical third parties increasingly. There's a confidence that they're ready, but that confidence may be a little misplaced. So there's sort of two sides to this: how ready are the financial institutions, and how ready are the suppliers? And if you sort of look at the suppliers, they don't necessarily have wanes. They don't necessarily have a regulatory horizon scanning team. This is new regulation to them. So obviously, the big suppliers, the ones that could potentially be classed as critical third-party providers, the likes of AWS and Microsoft, they're making a pretty fair assumption that they'll be classed as critical third-party providers, that they'll be regulated directly under DORA, and they're well into their preparation. It obviously involves a lot of change for them. Don't get me wrong, but the sort of suppliers, other than that, many suppliers are pretty reactive and they await requests from their customers. Mm-hmm. So those requests are generated by the customers, and what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, some things that do cause concern. We've seen a number of financial institutions simply rebranding procurement as third-party risk management, which is not great because it is a different skill set. And I've had a number of different representatives from our customers confirming that. That's not a wild statement from me. And others have recognized they have a gap in skill set internally, gone on hiring sprees for resilience experts, and brought in resilience teams, but large percentages of those are rebranded cyber experts. So there's been, a focus on cyber. And the risks that we deal with, supply failure, service deterioration, concentration risk, is kind of been left. There's an argument there that it isn't, that those risks are not being owned at a high enough level. So there's a confusion with the suppliers, not knowing whether they're being actually in scope, and not firmly understanding the requirements from them. I'm helping a communications company at the moment who are convinced that they'll be classed as a critical third-party provider. But that's mainly because they've received in excess of 200 requests from their financial services customers for DORA amendments to their contracts. And what is striking, having seen a large cross-section of those requests, is they're all different. They're all looking for different things. Some financial institutions are looking for very specific requirements, and some are putting very broad brushstrokes there within it. Some ask about stressed exit plans, some don't. Some are asking about fourth parties, nth parties, the suppliers to the suppliers, but most are not. And fourth parties is a requirement of DORA. Understanding that further extended supply chain is a requirement of it there. But it's the difference in request which is confusing the suppliers there. We ran Sorry, go on, Adrian. Apologies.
No, wait, I suppose I was then just might be quite a challenging question, but if you are a supplier that is facing those kind of questions and questionnaires, what advice would you give to them in terms of how to understand how to respond to it?
Having run a software company myself, I find it's always best to take control of the situation. Yeah, understand the regulations, understand the requirements of this, be ahead of it, be proactive. Often, if you can put a solution, excuse me, you can see I was suffering with a cold today. Get ahead of the curve, and proactively demonstrate to your customers that you are compliant, that you're ready for this, that you understand. And we will touch on this in I'm sure in a panel here, but it starts with a gap analysis, really, doesn't it? That's where you're understanding where you really lie. We ran a survey at the start of this year, sort of March or so, with CEFPRO, the Centre for Financial Professionals, and it was mainly responded to by third-party risk management professionals, business continuity, disaster recovery, crisis management, those kind of people. And at that stage, I think it was March, around about 49% of them were confident that they'd have their stressed exit plans in place before the deadlines. And yet only 8% of them had any successful stressed exit plans in place at that point in time. What we found out of those companies that we surveyed, 88% of the respondees either got the question wrong or confirmed that they didn't know who was actually responsible for the resilience of services, of SaaS services. That they weren't aware that the end user is actually responsible for supply failure, service deterioration, and concentration risk. Another stat from this, 65% of those who responded didn't actually know ultimately who's responsible for those risks, those non-cyber risks within their own organization. They weren't aware that this responsibility for this sits at the board level. 70% of them hadn't actually approached their intergroup outsourcer for their stressed exit plans. They were all getting the same responses from their suppliers, refusal to engage or contractual negotiations.
As you say, Wayne, I mean, maybe we can get into more detail on this with the broader panel, because as you've already said, we don't want to kind of preempt a lot of the other experts and the input that they'll want to have. So maybe if we just close off from our specific side and just talk about, when I started at the top of this, I was describing our services. You've then talked about DORA. It'd be useful to just join the two up and describe why why what we do is relevant?
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Yeah, obviously the likes of SS221, OCC, Interagency Guidance, MAS, Hong Kong, RBI, they all name escrow within their operational resilience regulations directly as a proportional solution. DORA must remain technology agnostic, so escrow isn't named. The agreements, the regulations are remarkably similar, but no solution is named in there. You'll see things like security, integrity, availability, all the way littered through DORA. But to get straight to the point, under Articles 25 and 26 of the Technical Standards Framework for DORA, there's a firm requirement to build demonstrably successful stressed exit plans for failed services, and they should be able to enable the financial services system to pull the management of a failed service in-house or pass the management of the failed service to a third party to manage. That's what escrow does. That's what we've always done. Supply failure, service deterioration, concentration risk are all named risks under DORA. 25 and 26, Articles 25 and 26, list them as must-test scenarios. As you mentioned at the top of the call, supply failure, service deterioration, and concentration risk are and always have been release events underneath all the escrow agreements. When you look at a good set of controls, what you're looking for is independent reviews and documentation reporting, oversight and accountability. That's what escrow does. Bear with me a second.
Sorry everyone.
No, sorry about that. I hope everybody didn't hear me coughing there. So we're firmly fit in there. We're massively applicable.
Okay, well, should we let you rest your voice for a while now?
Thank you.
I think that's our section done with now, but I'll now hand over to the panel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much to Adrian and Wayne there. That was an awesome deep dive there on DORA and how Escode can help there. So I'm gonna hand over to Angela to chair the next aspect of this event. We're gonna bring several more speakers, some partners, some fintechs, some awesome organizations and experts to join this discussion. Before I do that, I just want to highlight that we have had some questions in the Q&A function. So thank you to those people who have asked a question. You can remain anonymous. If you ask a question, you can put your name to it. That's absolutely fine. And just to highlight some of these that just now, that would be great. So we've had a question from Nick, who has said that I understand that the UK has its own operational risk regulation, but why does DORA, a European initiative, have significance and relevance to the UK given Brexit? Will we adopt it here? We had a question from an anonymous attendee who said, do you believe financial institutions and financial services providers will need to undergo remediation projects with their incumbent critical suppliers? And then we had a question from Tom who asked, is there a complete published timetable for the UK? And then asked a second question for Escode. Does Escode offer templates for DORA implementation and stressed exit plans? So that's definitely one for the team to respond to. And then we had another question, how does DORA align with OCIR? So if any of our panelists want to engage with any of those as part of the discussion, please feel free and answer that question live, or indeed you can sort of type an answer in the Q&A function there, and please do keep your questions coming. Thank you to the community for that. So yeah, I'll hand over at this point now to Angela, CEO of SkyPilot. Awesome to have you with us today, Angela. Thank you so much for your support. Please take it away from here and introduce our panel.
Firstly, Joe, thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure, and I admire the work that you guys have done and the community that you have built. We all know that the fintech industry thrives because of community, and community is everything. And the way you've mapped out what's happening in the north, I'm sure there's eyes lighting up in Westminster and all over the country to signpost the north as a very important part of the fintech ecosystem. So thank you to you and for all the work that you do there as a team. And we all benefit from that as well. And also for Escode for sponsoring this webinar today. I think DORA is still an area in which where people, like you say, 49% were ready in March, but there's still companies that are navigating in financial institutions, but like you say, in other sectors as well, where you're holding important data. So this panel is all around the countdown to DORA. For those of you that don't know what DORA is, it's the Digital Operational Resilience Act, which is due to come into force, I think, on the 17th of January. And it's a European Union Act, but also we in the UK are closely aligned to it. I think that our panelists will be able to give more information about where the UK is at with that, because there was 2 questions on that as well. But just to introduce myself, I'm often speaking on fintech, various different topics. I commentate on fintech. I am a non-exec director of some fintech companies. I'm also on the advisory board of the Payments Association and other groups like the European Women in Payments Network. And I have, obviously, I'm CEO and co-founder of SkyParler. We're a fintech specialist marketing, communications, and PR firm. We help businesses at all stages of their development, from startup to scale up to scale out. And we've seen many of our clients at the minute talk about this topic. It's a topic that it could be dry, but actually it's not. And thank you for the masterclass there that Adrian and Wayne just gave. I don't think we need to go through the basics right now. I think we can sort of dive into the discussion. We're going to have 2 polls in our discussion as well. One is, what is your organisation doing to prepare for the up and coming regulation? Please feel free to engage with that poll. And the other one is your organisation ready for DORA? And of course, this is all anonymised, but it would be interesting, because we've got a nice audience on today, to actually get a bit of a litmus test of how ready are fintechs and financial institutions for DORA. So I think now I'd like to introduce my panel. We've already heard from Wayne, so I'd like to get each of my panel to introduce themselves and just say a little bit about their role and also what they do when it comes to DORA, or how involved they are with it. So if I can start with Jackie. Hi, Jackie, how are you?
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much. My name is Jackie Kingham. I'm the Director of Business Transformation at Raisin. Raisin is a deposits and savings marketplace for a fintech based in Manchester, headquartered in Berlin. My role as Head of Business Transformation is I manage the relationship with our service bank, ClearBank. So that's all operational elements, oversight, where ClearBank outsource a lot of our financial crime and operational activities to us at Raisin, and also commercial elements. So when we're looking at developing new products and enhancing our service offering. Prior to joining Raisin, I worked as a management consultant at KPMG and EY, working on a lot of regulatory change projects, a lot of which were in the treasury space. And most recently, the last 9 years, I spent at Deutsche Bank. So I worked in a number of different areas in Deutsche Bank, a lot of that time in treasury and liquidity management, balance sheet management, looking at recovery and resolution planning. And my most recent role there, I was the COO for a global sales business, so selling markets products to our corporate clients. So that's a bit about me. How my current role interacts with DORA, as I manage the relationship with one of our key third-party providers. It's super important for me to make sure that we've got clear processes and procedures in place should there be any disruption. And I also work heavily with the compliance teams in terms of how we operationalize the processes and controls that we have in place.
Lovely, thank you. Jawad?
Hi everyone, I'm Jawad. So I look after compliance and risk teams here at Lenby. I have previously worked in a number of different building societies and come from the background of mortgages, collections, etc. So currently I'm working for Lenby. Lenby is a fintech, and the 3 key areas we focus on is on the loan management system, risk factor, and also KYC software. So we provide technology to financial organizations. How I'm linked to DORA is as the compliance and risk manager here at Lenby, we do have a number of different clients who operate with technology, have third parties who operate with technologies and payment services as well. As we do provide white labeling services as well, so we're always being asked to provide feedback as well as share our expertise on how to handle and manage risk and how we manage them in-house as well to protect some of the risks which Wayne and Adrian mentioned earlier on.
And Rich.
Thanks, Angela. Good morning. Great to virtually meet you all. I'm Richard Curtis, a director in RSM's Technology and Cyber Risk Assurance team, focusing on cybersecurity and operational resilience. I'm a certified ethical hacker, and I've worked for various IT consulting firms during my career, covering a variety of roles in network infrastructure, IT management, cloud technologies, operational resilience, and IT risk assessment, focusing on cybersecurity.
Thank you, everybody. I think we've got a good baseline for what DORA is. If any of our listeners still, have any questions on it, please put them on into the chat. But I think I'd probably first like to ask Jared. There's always been frameworks around, but now this framework has been formalized and it's an act. How do you think that changes things, Jared?
So I think it's a great opportunity for organizations out there. I mean, it impacts somewhat over 20,000 different organizations out there, but I think the framework has already been there, and some of the organizations will be familiar with the names such as Enterprise Risk Management Framework or a Risk Management Frameworks, information security risks, IT-related risks, third-party management risks. And these are some of the words or some of the risks which some of the organizations would have heard in their different level of risk meetings, whether they call that an operational risk committee or a senior leader risk committee. So I think the basic frameworks have already been there, and what DORA does is it underpins the importance and it covers it up with more extension to framework linked to DORA. So the good news is I don't think it's reinventing the wheel, but I think it is sort of relooking at what we already do, and it backs up with an act. So that's what I would say.
And it's about time as well, I guess, because cyber attacks are becoming more and more prevalent. They've always been there and they'll always be here. But it feels like world governments haven't really done. They've always been behind the fraudsters or they've always been behind the technologists, the innovators as well. So what do we think then are some of the challenges and opportunities for fintechs and financial institutions? Perhaps Wayne could take that one.
The challenges and sorry, I cut out when you were talking there. Apologies.
The challenges and opportunities for our sector, for financial institutions and fintechs.
I think for fintechs in particular, there's a real opportunity here to differentiate yourselves from the competition. Adopting and embracing these regulatory changes earlier, being able to demonstrate that your services are resilient, that they maybe can be repeated, that there's good code structure, that they are secure, available, there is integrity, that the service will remain available even if your company is no longer available. It's like a guarantee, isn't it? An assurance that your company can operate ethically, and the services will continually remain available. If we look at fintechs here within the UK, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of fintechs here in the UK don't just want to trade with the UK. So you're going to need to be able to demonstrate that you can make these regulatory requirements throughout Europe. If you can meet the UK versions of this, the likes of SS221 and SS121, financial market infrastructure stuff, upcoming critical third parties, you go a very, very, very long way to meeting the vast wide array of requirements that are contained within DORA. So what you're ending up there with is a a kite mark, a seal of quality, something that was sort of pulled out in the Khalifa report some time back that was mentioned in there about this sort of fintech passport thing. It never came to fruition, but it's a wonderful opportunity because some of the larger providers may well struggle to do this. They're not as nimble, not as agile. Some of the larger providers, core banking software providers, have kind of replicated what they did on premise in the cloud. So if you can demonstrate as a fintech that you can meet these requirements, it's a license to trade, isn't it? Really.
Thanks.
Sorry, Rich.
Sorry,
Yes.
Angela, if I can just add something into that as well. I think some of the challenging points are things like DORA prohibits the concentration of risk and states that organizations shouldn't just rely on a single service provider, especially for business critical processes. So organizations will most likely need to use multiple cloud service providers, a range of security vendors. And obviously that's quite challenging, presents cost and complexity. There needs to be things like setting, evolving and evidencing risk-based policies, digital operation resilience testing requirements sort of need to be proportionate to the entity size, and harmonizing key elements of the service and relationship with those ICT third-party providers to sort of enable complete monitoring as well is a requirement and can be quite challenging to implement in practice.
So that's potentially why the industry is getting there with it, but it's not quite there. But I'm very interested in how this impacts UK businesses, and I know some of the listeners are as well. Would anybody like to sort of take the question? Are UK businesses preparing for this in the same way as the EU? And if they are, why? Who would like to take that?
I can start off. I'm sure others can chime in as well. So obviously, as DORA is primarily an EU regulation, it still does have implications for UK businesses that provide services to EU citizens. So if a UK business is transacting with EU customers, it needs to be aware of and comply with DORA regulations. The same thing with IT or UK-based IT service providers that service UK entities. They will need to comply with DORA's requirements. And that includes having robust ICT risk management frameworks, incident reporting mechanisms, and crucially, digital operation resilience testing. So preparing for DORA will involve reviewing and possibly enhancing the current sort of risk management processes or practices that you already have in place. So whilst the UK may not directly adopt DORA in its entirety, it's likely that elements of DORA will influence the UK's regulatory updates for operational resilience. And that should happen throughout the coming months as well.
Good.
If
I
you
mean,
don't
because they
mind,
are good. Sorry. Who's that? Oh, Jared, yes.
I was just going to add to that point. I think another thing to consider here is, like Wayne said earlier on, that a lot of fintechs, they are either aspiring or looking to expand into EU, and that's one of the point. But the other point being is, even if you work for an organization who is not currently directly involved with EU service providers, but if you look at wider the third party relationship you may have of one of the services, whether that is a payment or any other ICT related services, there may be a link to one of the EU provider or some way a third or a fourth sort of like extension to it. So I think when looking at DORA in the UK organizations, and if there are some people who are looking at it thinking we don't really operate within EU, one of the things I would say is it's worth looking at what are the sort of the key business areas and how are they linked to any other third-party providers. And it may be the third-party providers you are trading and doing business with, they may have a link to EU or DORA. So it's worth thinking about that as well.
I mean, also, I think, Wayne, you mentioned that there was a communications company that you're working with. at the moment. Is that communications in terms of PR and marketing, or do you mean in terms of IT communications? What sort of business was that?
More telecommunications.
Telecoms, right?
Yeah,
Because I was
yeah.
going to say, even from a point of view of a comms company like Skyparler, because we work with fintechs and financial institutions, when we've gone through large RFPs, we've had to show how rigorous our cybersecurity controls are, right down to having, every staff member trained up and going through some courses. So I think there is an element of that, regardless what sort of business you are, these are really good practices to have, aren't they?
Yeah, communications is a vital part of any sort of crisis management exercise, strategy. You know, at the end of the day, you've got to try and manage a PR risk, haven't you? Communications internally and externally to the board, to the regulators, to the customers, to the market. All of that has to have a strategy. It would certainly fit massively within any sort of stressed exit plan that's there. But you've got to kind of limit that. If you look at that recent well publicized the CrowdStrike thing there, the early reports that were coming out were this was a Microsoft issue, this is a Microsoft issue, but it wasn't a Microsoft issue. It was another supplier that performed a similar function. It was a competitor that performed a similar function, and MS took some time to go out there and help with the situation and communicate to the market that this wasn't their issue, but they're helping. Does that make sense? But
yeah, no, it does totally. I think it's broader than you're sort of giving it credit for. But Jackie, can you talk about how compliance teams can ensure that third parties are meeting resilience expectations? What should organizations consider when it comes to third party vendors? And I know you've all got a view on that, but I think this is an area where Jackie can add some real value to us all. So I'd be interested in your viewpoints here.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I mean, first, if we sort of look at what compliance functions can do, and I've seen it a lot already. You only need to look through LinkedIn and you see so many companies hiring for operational resilience specialists. So having someone join the team whose sole focus is on operational resilience, I think that's great. And I think, having someone who can fully dedicate their time to just making sure that organizationally you're ready and adaptable, I think is one great step. I think what else teams can start looking to do is do a gap analysis, because there's a lot of stuff that we're probably already doing and we just don't think of it in the context of operational resilience. So really doing a gap analysis and say, actually, we're already doing this. So for these 5 processes, it's probably just a small enhancement to get us over the line. And for these areas, actually, there's a huge gap, there's a huge lift. So this is, where our focus area is. So kind of doing that gap analysis and integrating DORA into their existing compliance frameworks. I think that's a really key thing. When it comes to third-party risk, I think, fintechs, we're really susceptible to this because a lot of our organizations, we don't build everything that we do in-house. A lot of our organizations are partnering with other organizations. For example, if I take Raisin, where I work, we offer customers the ability to access lots of different, savings products. We're not a bank, but we partner with a bank who have a banking license, who service the accounts that we essentially offer. A lot of our organizations who deal with, retail customers and corporate customers, we do PEPs and sanction screenings. So we rely on vendors. We don't build an in-house solution to monitor PEPs and sanctions. We look for an external counterparty. So it's having a map. What are all your critical functions where you are relying on an external vendor? Are we doing appropriate due diligence before we onboard them? Do we have an ongoing due diligence process? And are we conducting regular audits? Are they providing us what they said they were going to provide us? And do we have incident management frameworks in place? And are we conducting regular drills and testing the effectiveness of that? So I think, I could go on for ages on this topic, but that probably gives you like a few highlights of the key things to start thinking about.
I do worry for some of the small businesses, the SMEs, the amount of extra work it's going to take. But then I guess it's the responsibility of everybody, from each individual user of a computer almost, or IT systems, right through to the large multinational corporations and through to government, where they're holding, very sensitive data. I think there's almost a responsibility of all of us to even think of a watered down version of DORA to help us manage IT security, because it's got the responsibility's got to sit with with all of us, and it's easy to sort of think, oh, I can't be bothered to do these certain things, but we need to be bothered, don't we?
Yeah, I can add something onto that. I think 95% of all cyber attacks are the result of human error. So creating a security culture is key, embedding security and awareness training, and just being, DORA aside, just being aware of all the risks and how to mitigate those risks will definitely go a long way.
How will DORA impact cybersecurity controls, Rich? There's more now. There's boards need to be held to account for a start, don't they?
Yes. So one of the crucial mandates from DORA is that boards of financial service organizations will be accountable for ICT risk by law. This is a big step forward, where it was recognized as a board level before, but it's now codified in EU law. The board must also be educated in the threats and risks of their digital estate. So scrutiny on CISOs and other cybersecurity leaders will likely increase, as will the influence within the boardroom as well. And as we mentioned, DORA prohibits concentration of risk. So FS firms will need to not rely on a single service provider for business critical processes, using things like multiple cloud providers, a range of security vendors, but then also things like threat-led penetration testing. It's not just a checkbox exercise where you can say you've performed a penetration test. There will need to be a bit more focus on threat-led testing, so like red teaming, where you would do cyber attack simulations, test a range of scenario types as well, just to make sure that the business can recover from different types of cyber incidents.
Yeah, and I guess having those conversations at a board level, what impact, where in businesses that you've all worked in, where cybersecurity, is a crucial part of the boardroom conversation, do you see those as companies that tend to be safer? What would be your advice about the discussions that they should be having at a board level? And that's open to anybody that would like to answer it. I think, Richard, you would have a view on this as well.
Yeah. I'll start off and others can jump in. So we've seen a massive uptake we provide board level training and awareness as well. So we've seen a massive uptake in that. And I don't know if it would make them safer. It just makes them more prepared to handle an event when it does happen. So understanding how to deal with your PR, with your third parties, with your cyber insurer, with a range of different factors will just get you a lot more prepared for a cyber event.
I guess it's not necessarily if it's going to happen, it's when. And I think the idea of being prepared for any eventuality, or at least having some form of rule book or some training to know what to do, must be crucial. Would anyone else like to see what they're seeing at a boardroom level?
I mean, if I can add, Angela, and I think fintechs, we're in a really good position where we have that agility to change and adapt. I think, especially in my experience working at, large global banks, we almost have this view that compliance is a bit of a burden. It's an expense on the business. And I think fintechs, we have a real opportunity to turn that into a competitive advantage against larger organizations, because we're quick enough, we're nimble enough to embed these sort of controls and operational processes into our actual product offering. So whilst it is a cost, I think we can very easily turn this into a advantage over our competitors, because we can show that we have the, for lack of a better word, resilience.
I think you can talk to that well, Jackie, because you've seen two sides of the coin, both the corporate side and the sort of the emerging fintech side as well. But I totally agree with you, and we're seeing something happen full circle at the minute, where we're seeing large FIs wishing they were fintechs, which is quite, and wanting to act and look and feel like a fintech, and that means I think that some of the things that we put in place early on, after the 2008 crash, is actually working. We are seeing more competition, and I think we are nipping a little bit at the heels of the CMA 9. And exactly what you've just said, we have, when it comes to DORA and security and frameworks, we can implement them as part of our everyday lives in much more agile way than the larger organizations where they have thousands of employees. So you could argue that you'd be safer putting your money with Raisin than you might be with one of the larger players, because you can actually jump on changes as and when they're happening.
Absolutely. And I know that there are a lot of people in the audience who are from larger banks, so don't panic. I think I can comment that there's a lot of stuff that larger banks already have in place. So incident management frameworks, that's something that a lot of organizations have in place. This gives you an opportunity to really benchmark yourself. You now have an industry standard of what that should look like. So I think, larger organizations, you have a lot of stuff in place, but unfortunately the reality is larger organizations, there's so much more governance and red tape to kind of get things over the line. Absolutely right, fintechs can be more competitive because, in a smaller organization, it's a case of maybe 3 people getting in a room. Next week, bang, it's implemented, it's done. But I think, there is a lot to say for kind of compliance, governance and controls frameworks that have evolved over, some banks are hundreds of years old, and those frameworks have evolved. So, maybe in some areas it's just a small incremental step, but it kind of gives everybody sort of like a level playing field on, what is best practice and, what should I be doing?
Just to jump in really quickly, guys, there's a question in the chat that I think could be a good fit potentially for Rich and Jackie there, which was the question about, do you believe financial institutions and FS providers will need to undergo remediation projects with their incumbent critical suppliers? Does anybody want to address that question?
Yeah, thanks. I can jump in. So yes, I think financial institutions and FS providers will likely need to undergo sort of remediation projects with critical suppliers in order to align with DORA, similar to what was done to comply with the EBA. So DORA really introduces stricter requirements on, as everybody's been saying today, third-party risk management, increased oversight and resilience measures, specifically for ICT providers. So FS institutions will need to ensure that critical suppliers comply with this. So it may involve revisiting contracts, updating risk management frameworks, performing additional resilience testing, and just making sure that they're able to demonstrate that they do comply with those areas.
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go on, Wayne, please.
I was gonna say, embrace failure. I was giving a speech at the Law Society recently, followed on by a speaker from the Bank of England, and he said that if you're passing all your scenario tests, you're doing something wrong. Yeah, there's a firm acknowledgement that some of these services will not be resilient. That's not the death knell, the nail in the coffin that it could seem to be. The idea is to get the suppliers and the financial institutions to kind of raise this operational resilience baseline over time, use the contractual mechanisms to enforce this where necessary, but to get better, to understand risk, understand whether you can own that risk or whether you'd need to move away. It's not meant to get customer and user supplier at each other's throats. It's kind of understanding that historically these services were provided in-house by in-house IT teams, and as everything gets more and more increasingly outsourced, just because they're not part of a bank doesn't mean they shouldn't be held to the same level of scrutiny and the same high standards.
So
But
I think
yeah,
that's good.
so I was going to say that I think it's a good point to bring up that, like there will be failures and we'll probably see those. They're happening all the time, but we're going to see them after the act has come into force. Generally speaking, that's when, they make the news. But, we can learn from those, and even the companies that they happen to, they can learn from them too. It's certainly, if everybody's doing everything that's right, you still sometimes can't avoid infiltration into your systems. And I think we need to be a bit more supportive in terms of, like, we're in this together. The organized criminals are in this together. They know what's going on from each side of the coin. I think, us as organizations being in this together and sharing and learning is also a part of, in my opinion, the narrative. And I'm going to talk about the narrative because I'm all about communications. But I think that with DORA, I think that it's become a big part of the communications narrative of companies. And I think these kite marks that you were talking about, us being able to utilize them to give consumers and other businesses more security and understanding that at least we've done more than the basics is a wonderful thing. So sorry, somebody else was going to jump in there. Who was that?
Sorry, I was just going to jump into the point of the point you made as well. I think we need to embrace change as well. So
I
the
agree.
key technology we are providing is to some of the major banks and the lenders out there. And the question we saw ourselves facing from these major banks and lenders was that what are you doing as a fintech to be compliant, and how are you changing your outlook at risk? So for us, we did a bit of an extensive exercise where we weren't afraid to say, do you know what? We need to look at our enterprise risk management framework. We have executive risk committee, we have the BCMS working party, we have operational risk committee. We need to relook and realign what are the type of risks are being mentioned at all of these different committees. And as a result, we ended up kind of identifying gap. And I think Wayne and Adrian spoke about this gap analysis earlier on, that doing that gap analysis. And for us, it was getting to the point of maybe we do not speak about the incident management, the information security risk enough at our operational risk committee. And your
Yeah.
operational risk committee is the key between the senior level executive risk committee and the BCMS working party. So it's joining those dots and doing the gap analysis to think, how can we embed all of these risk management frameworks we have in all parts of your organization, so you are tackling from all angles rather than just the IT forefront.
Absolutely. I mean, it leads quite nicely onto, I mean, most of the people on our audience will know this but some may not, and they may have come on to be educated about the essential steps required. So there's 4 areas, isn't there, to cover? So what are the 4 areas required to cover from a service provider's perspective when it comes to DORA? That's to you, Jared.
Yeah,
Jared.
so sorry, yeah. So the 4 key areas, the way we've defined it, and when you look at DORA, some people may say it's 5 and 6, but how we are defining as fintech is the first one is the ICT forefront. So that's your ICT risk management. It's looking at the ICT third party risk management as well, and your ICT related incidents. So we've kind of like looked at it to say, if you sort of like look at your risk management, the third party and the incident into one, that's the first pillar. The second one is what intelligence you have on your cyber threats, what kind of information sharing you get with the suppliers you work or those you're working for. And information is the key, what kind of data you get, whether that is in the PEPs and sanction screening world, whether that is in provision of payment services, you can apply the same principle. And that's your second pillar. The third one I would say is the oversight of your critical third parties, and having some sort of like a framework you can call whatever that framework, because some of these organizations may already have it. But the key thing is that ICT third-party providers, how close you are to it, what due diligence have you completed, and what do you understand about the risks? Um, and the fourth pillar I would say is the uh, I'm sure someone mentioned earlier on, is the operational resilience testing. Um, so that's the four key areas I would say.
Well, that's really helpful for me as somebody that, is not living and breathing it like you. And there'll be others here, I'm sure that, came on to understand that. So thank you for that. So, we understand the basics. We know it's emerging by the end of January. We are it's fully fledged act. We've had a couple of years to prepare for it. And the industry has responded to the regulation, and the industry is doing a great job. But what's the best way for fintechs, regtechs, and FIs to maintain compliance? It's a continual 360-degree loop, isn't it, Rich?
Yes, and I think obviously there's a lot of structures already in place. But there should be mechanisms and policies for handling all ICT-related incidents. I think the structure would need to change somewhat with regards to risk management. Involving different areas of the business working together, sort of creating a more harmonized function. Because as we know, cybersecurity isn't just with the people that do the risk management, but with everybody. Yeah, some of those key areas.
Brilliant. And it's not just about what we do in the frameworks. We've talked a lot about culture on this podcast today. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. We've got the strategy, we've got the framework, but what cultural changes do we believe are necessary for organizations to truly embed operational resilience into their day-to-day operations? Jackie, I know we spoke about that when we did our briefing call.
Yeah, so I mean, culture's a really interesting one, because it's critical, and ensuring that you have the right culture in your organization is also something that can set you apart from your competitors. And I think a lot of people on this webinar are people who are really involved into the day-to-day, and we know what operational resilience is. People on your customer service desk, they might not have a clue. So it's, are we training employees who, are working with this day-to-day, but they don't realize it in the context of operational resilience. So making sure that everybody is aware of what's going on, what's the strategy, what we're trying to aim towards, and what we need to have in place, and being open and fostering that environment to be open about identifying risks. So not being afraid to flag, actually, I think there's a problem here. And having that medium to be able to kind of escalate that up within the organization, and recognizing and rewarding that behavior, encouraging people to be proactive around enhancing resilience. And it's very much easier said than done, and it's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing exercise of that training and fostering that open conversation.
It's almost like, yes, it's almost like eating healthily or going to the gym regularly. I think we all need to look at it as part of our everyday lives moving forward, don't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd throw in there, I don't know if anybody's read some of the work by Michael Grimwade on operational resilience, on his 10 rules of operational risk. He's tracked and traced back that the vast majority of operational failures actually relate to culture. Specifically, really? Financially incentive-based cultures. People will do the wrong thing when there's money involved, and I know that sounds really basic and obvious when you think about it, but as Jackie was saying there, if you can breed a culture, an OKR-based sort of culture that rewards ethical and sound behavior, you will in time see those benefits. We judge a successful fintech on what? Some narrow parameters, really: the ability to scale rapidly and the ability to deliver a return to investors. You'd never accept that from a financial institution. There's a lot more ethics around it. And if those fintechs are performing the functions, maybe only 1% of a function of a financial institution, but that might go out to 7, 10, 12% of the market. It's only fair to ensure the financial institution's ethical core on the supply chain too.
I was going to say I'd love the fintechs to be improving the lives of the global population, and I think one way of doing this is to constantly be complying with DORA. But obviously, money comes with doing a good job. You need to be focused on the money, but you also need to be equally as focused on some of these other areas, including broader topics like diversity, sustainability, environment. But anyway, sorry, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to say a very quick one. It's again one of the objectives from our people services when we looked at all the revisions I spoke earlier on about was embedding capabilities, and it sounds like a very a straightforward one, and everyone I'm sure knows about embedding capabilities. But we looked at it to say, how do we get the people at the forefront, those who may work in the contact center, who may work in the service desk? Some of the stuff we are speaking about here, let's be honest, it is quite complicated, and
Definitely.
whilst we have spent hours and hours researching and reading, but people at the forefront who are dealing with the incidents and all of these things, they don't have that time. So how do we simplify it, embed those capabilities, and goes back to the point of improve that culture?
I love that. Yeah, if it's embedded, it's something that happens, naturally, doesn't it? So absolutely. I mean, we've only got a few minutes left now. I think so the last question that I had on my list is what's missing from the DORA framework, and what do you believe might needed to be added in the future? So I'll open that up to any of my panelists. In fact, if you can all answer it in some way, that would be brilliant. But what do you think that if you've done, you've put it in your business, Gerard. You've actually kind of implemented this. Other people are advising others to implement it, and on our panel, and we have absolute experts here. But so this inside out. What do you think they missed? I'll go with you first, Gerard.
Okay, so I think for me is I suppose it's the fear of when we've embedded it. It's what you don't know, you don't know. And when we are looking at it and we are spending the intensive hours thinking, what does this mean for the risk committees and our enterprise risk management framework and the third-party suppliers we deal with? So in terms of the missing space, I couldn't really point a finger here, but I think one of the things we keep looking at it thinking, are we missing the trick here? Something? Have we overly simplified this? And whilst I know I have spoken about earlier on to say it's not reinventing the wheel, it's re-embedding some of the good stuff organizations are doing here. But one of the questions I keep myself asking here is saying, have we missed a trick here? Because it feels like some of the stuff we were already doing, we have just extended to that. So I couldn't really say that there is that one thing, but I think over the time, once it comes in play and the proof will be in the pudding, once we put all of this to test. So I think one of the focus we do need the stress testing element and keep doing the scenario testing just to understand.
I think in maybe 6 to 9 months from now, we need to get around the table as a team again, and I think we might well have plenty to say on this topic. Anyone else would like to, in the panel, would like to sort of give some lasting comments on what we think might be missing?
Sorry, Wayne, do you want to go ahead?
I was just going to flippantly say maybe you're already resilient, Jawad. Maybe you're absolutely excellent at your jobs, and that's why it's been a bit lazy. But sorry to interrupt, Richard.
No worries. I think global alignment and sector specific. So DORA obviously applies broadly to FS services. It's not really global at this stage. It's an EU sort of regulation. There's an area around human risk and cyber awareness. So it does mandate ICT risk management, but it doesn't extensively address the human element side. And then on the information sharing and response, there is an obligation to report, but it doesn't really talk about gathering cyber threat intelligence and data between institutions and things as well.
Cool. So there's still work to be had, and I agree with you on other sectors. I think it's something that all sectors should be embedding into their organizations.
I think just to add, Angela, a couple of comments
Yeah.
from me, and building on what Rich just mentioned as well is, I definitely see future trends and move towards having more of a global standard. I think
Yeah.
different jurisdictions, different companies, we've all got our own things that we're doing in terms of incident management, when things go down, what are backup plans, etc. I think we're definitely seeing the move towards a global standard. And I think ultimately what this is trying to do is just make our organizations, stronger and more reliable. And hopefully, that feeds down to us as consumers getting, better services and better products from the companies that we interact with.
And
Fabulous.
I'll just throw in, I think we'll find out what's missing in the coming iterations, because through all the reporting elements, through all the stuff that's going to be collated and the information that's going to be put into the regulators, they're going to get a real proper deep insight to usage and proper concentration risk. I think we're going to get certain important business systems that we never really considered to be critical, or a critical third party provider being pulled into scope. I think we're going to get a real proper understanding of the different elements of risks, and the regulation itself is designed to mature over time. So not meaning to be all doomsayery, but I think this is stage one, and I think it's going to get better. I think you'll see some critical third-party providers being moved away from being defined as a risk, and I think we might see risky, less mature, less resilient services being pulled into scope.
Fabulous. We've come to the end of our time, which is a shame. I feel a bit bereaved by that because I've very much enjoyed it. But I just want to I'll just pick out a few things that were said. Firstly, one of my favorite things that was said was, if you're passing every scenario test, you're doing something wrong. That came from Wayne. So I
Not
think
from me,
well
not
done.
from me.
Yeah, sorry, it's you. I'm going to put it on a meme. Ignore third-party scenario testing at your peril. Well, that's a statement. People should understand the critical and important functions supported by ICT. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think having it at a board level, I think it's going to become more of a blended. DORA is going to be a project team with more blended functions on it. We talked about communications being crucial to that, but also compliance teams, finance teams, operational teams. Perhaps it will broaden out to virtually every human within the organization and outside. So we'll get this DORA synchronization that we're all hoping for. And then the importance of responsibility. And, as we are the custodians of the knowledge on this webinar, but also within our organizations, we're responsible too for improving stakeholder standards. Anybody else like to make a lasting comment, or are you happy with my little summary there? Thumbs up. I love a thumbs up.
Yeah,
I think I'll hand over to Joe, because we're all out here. We're all full of flu or whatever we're full of.
Thank you, Angela. I tell you what, we've had some really good panels at FinTech North down the years, but that was a tour de force. I think we could have carried on for another 90 minutes if we wanted to there, but conscious of time and that everybody who's joined live has taken time out of their day to be with us here. So we'll bring things to a close there. I know that the FinTech North team at our command center here have been typing furiously, capturing all of the excellent insight that we've had there. So huge thank you to all of our speakers. Huge thank you to Angela as chair. Massive thank you to the team at Escode and NCC Group for helping to shape the content today. We're gonna produce a write-up, and we'll be sharing the recording with our community once that's live as well. So it just falls to me to sign off and say thank you to everybody for joining the webinar, and we'll hope to see you at a FinTech North event soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.